I remember older people saying, when I was a little kid, I'd no more want to do that than fly to the moon. And I'd think, who wouldn't want to fly to the moon? Well, it turns out I'm not the only one who would jump at the chance to strap myself to a rocket. People are lining up, paying seven-figure sums to be one of the first space tourists. Technology has changed so fast. What seemed to be unthinkable when my parents were kids is now taken for granted. It kind of makes you wonder, what's next?
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
Hey, it's great you could join us this week for Signs of the Times Radio. I have with me here in the studio Assistant Editor of Signs of the Times magazine, Daniel Kubarek. How are you, Daniel?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm really well, boy. I think you just peaked out the the audio there with your enthusiasm. It's good to have you with us.
Yeah, sorry for everyone at home whose ears have just been absolutely exploded by that.
No, that's all cool, man. Hey, now, Dan, you've written a really interesting article in this month's Signs of the Times, the November edition. It's called Hypersonic Travel and the End Times, which is a sort of a, well, some people might see it as a bit of a crazy juxtaposition, to put those two ideas together, but it is a fascinating article. And you actually start by talking about an encounter that you had, or perhaps almost had, with Elon Musk in your beloved hometown of Adelaide. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I didn't even know who Elon Musk was prior to 2017. It's so weird, right? Like, he's such a big personality in the world. He's one of those people that we sort of view as a visionary, a big thinker, a person who gets things done, makes things happen. And yet I had no idea who he was.
Well, you obviously haven't been watching enough Marvel movies, because the character of Iron Man, I believe, is based on Elon Musk.
Yeah, exactly. It's so weird. So the first time I really heard about him was after I'd finished my journalism degree, which was in 2016. 2017, I had a lot of time. So I was sitting at home and there was this news that a big announcement was going to happen. Adelaide was going to build a massive battery to back up its power grid, because Adelaide had been suffering from a whole bunch of blackouts. It was It was becoming a laughing stock around the world. It was making news it was making news pretty much everywhere. I heard from Europe that they'd even been told that Adelaide is, this place where it's dark all the time, pretty much.
So Iron Man to the rescue, eh?
Yeah, so then we started hearing around about the time of that announcement that, in fact, it would be Elon Musk of Tesla that would be coming in and building this battery to back up the power grid. And again, I didn't know who Elon Musk was at that point. But I did watch the press conference live, and it was so interesting. It was this man who was sort of like, when he presents in public, he seems almost sort of awkward or nervous.
Oh, really?
And yet here he was with these huge ideas, huge solutions to problems.
Yeah.
And I was just fascinated. This man he comes across as, the everyday Joe, and yet he is a big thinker.
Wow, okay.
So that's
it kind of reminds me of what they used to say about Steve Jobs. They said he had a reality distortion field around him, that basically when he opened his mouth and began to speak, people around him started to believe that what seemed impossible before was now possible, and then it actually became possible simply because he said it was possible. Do you get the same sense from Elon Musk, that he thinks big and things just become possible?
Yeah, well, exactly. The whole thing with the battery all started because this guy called Mike Cannon-Brookes tweeted out to Elon Musk and sort of challenged him on Twitter and asked him, can you make this thing happen for South Australia? And he's like, yep, we'll do it in 100 days. And that's sort of the whole main crux of the contract that he had. He sort of kept to his promise, and eventually, it happened. That was where it all started on Twitter, and then the South Australian government got involved. It's quite crazy to think that he's capable of something like this. This is the man who invented PayPal. He's sort of started out, his main crux of his wealth started out from being in IT and making websites and this sort of thing. And now he's working with making rockets and sending rockets into space and dreaming about landing on Mars. For me, that is quite perplexing. I don't understand how, one man can be capable of so much knowledge. I'm sure he has very knowledgeable men around him.
And women.
And women, of course. So, it's fair to assume that he's got an awesome team, but he is a visionary for sure. So when he came back, so that was the first time I sort of came across him, and then I started doing a lot of research into him after he committed to making that battery, was sort of following what was going on with that.
Yeah.
People were talking about him quite a bit. And then obviously later on in the year, I was interning with Channel 9. Now, during that week on the Friday, he was going to land in Adelaide and present at the International Astronautical Conference.
Okay.
So, that whole week I was telling all the journos, they were like, oh, do you want to come with us to this story where this and this and this? I'm like, no. Friday, I want to go see Elon Musk. And I was talking to the main political reporter at Channel 9, and he was like, yeah, we'll try and get you in. But then it didn't end up happening because only one pass was allocated to Channel 9.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, I couldn't go.
But during this press conference, he talked about the space, he's talked about rockets and all this sort of stuff, saying that it would be possible to travel, from one side of the world to the other in under an hour. New York to Shanghai in 39 minutes. I mean, wow, how did that strike you, those sort of ideas?
Well, again, it doesn't make any sense to me, because how can it be possible that we are already talking that far ahead and at the moment we're still flying commercial airliners, and yet here is a man who is suggesting that we're going to all jump into rockets and land on the other side of the world in the amount of time that it would take to make or eat a sandwich. It's just...
Does it take you an hour to eat a sandwich?
Well,
Daniel?
my sandwiches are really big, so it might, or you just want to savor the taste of it. Okay. I don't know, but
so has that sort of sparked your interest and your curiosity about hypersonic travel and rocket travel? And I mean, have you sort of looked into it anymore?
Well, all these concepts seem really far-fetched, to be quite honest. When Elon Musk talks about Mars, and he talks about us moving to Mars because of World War III, the reasonable part of you thinks, no way. There's no way that we have any reason to move into Mars at this point in time. And yet, that's the sort of discussion that's being floated around quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think a lot of my interest in this sort of stuff comes from my interest in travel technology.
Yeah.
I sort of grew up with Formula One, and my parents moved to Adelaide in 1995, which was just before the last Formula One Grand Prix was happening there, and my dad went.
Yes, Melbourne. You stole Adelaide's Grand Prix, and Adelaide has still not forgiven you.
It's funny because I don't really have any reason to hold any grudges, because I was just born at that point. I don't even know if I was born. No, I think I was like a week or two old when the Grand Prix happened for the last time in Adelaide. But anyway, so I sort of grew up with all these myths and sort of things that my dad told me about the Grand Prix. He's like, oh man, it's so fast. You're just looking at the track and they like fly past, and you don't even see the car. You don't know what it looks like. You just see this thing just fly past you at over 300 kilometers an hour, and it's so loud. He said it's like so high pitched that you have to wear earplugs, and if you don't, it'll burst your ears. And as a kid, I was just like, how is it possible that there's cars that are this fast? And we sort of, as I was growing up, we used to record Formula One Grand Prix and watch them back on VCR, because obviously they were on really late.
Yep.
Especially my dad, my brother and I, we used to follow Michael Schumacher a lot. So I followed Formula One quite a bit, and obviously Formula One is very technical. These cars are built like jet airplanes with all the aerodynamics and stuff. So they literally look at jet planes as a source of inspiration as far as downforce and all of these sort of aerodynamic forces go.
Well, but essentially they're just like big go-karts, aren't they, really? I mean, the people who go to Formula One start with like Formula 3, Formula 2, which are basically smaller go-karts, and work their way up.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's even Formula E now, which is the like the electric car races, which is pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, and the first season that was on, I was actually watching every single race, because I think it's very interesting that the world is heading in a direction which is electronic, which ties back to the Elon Musk thing, because he's obviously a big pioneer of electric technology. That's not to say that he invented electric technology, because I remember even in the early 2000s, or sort of mid to early 2000s, when these sort of hybrid cars started coming around, and you could hear them drive past, and it'd be like this just high-pitched like thing. So it wasn't by any chance his idea, but
but that Tesla Roadster, I mean, that just completely, blew people away with how cool an electric car could be, how incredibly fast it could go, and the range that it could have. I think it's been a real game changer. I mean, we got to give Elon Musk a fair bit of credit, I think, for really, really changing perceptions when it comes to electric vehicles, because everyone else is playing catch up now.
Yeah, exactly. As far as other travel technologies go, what really struck me recently, especially when I was writing this article and was a main source of inspiration for this article, was the Boeing hypersonic aircraft concept, which pretty much says they want to build a hypersonic aircraft that'll be flying commercially, and it'll be flying for much cheaper than the Concorde. Now, to give some background on what hypersonic and supersonic and all this sort of stuff is.
Yeah, please, let's define our terms. So I know what supersonic is. Supersonic is anything that's faster than the speed of sound.
My first experiences going to car races, my dad, we used to go to the Clipsal 500. I remember when there used to be jet planes that used to do flyovers, and they'd do this massive kaboom, and this like puff of sort of like vapor would form around the jet plane as it started going faster than the speed of sound.
Oh, wow. Okay. Actually breaking the sound barrier right there.
Yeah. So what used to happen was, back from the 70s onwards until 2003 when it was decommissioned, there used to be the Concorde aircraft, which is...
Was it New York to Paris or London or something like that?
Yeah, it was super fast.
I remember that when I was a kid. It was really cool. The other cool one's the SR-71, the Blackbird. That was a military aircraft. That was the fastest, I think, for a fair while.
With the Concorde, though, it was to carry people. It was a commercial airliner, but it was only for the rich people because it's so expensive to fly a supersonic aircraft around. So pretty much, it was very limited, and ended up, everyone thinks that there was a crash where people died. That was the sort of the nail in the coffin for that whole supersonic aircraft program. But in actual fact, it was that combined with the fact that the Concorde program was bleeding a lot of money. They were catering towards the people of luxury, people who had money to fly on these planes, and it wasn't for the everyday Joe like me who can barely afford to fly Jetstar anywhere. So, not dissing Jetstar or anything, they're actually pretty cool.
So hypersonic, what's hypersonic as opposed to supersonic? So
hypersonic is even faster than supersonic. Supersonic, with these aircrafts, they measure how fast they go in terms of Mach. So M-A-C-H.
Mach 1 or Mach 1 is the speed of sound.
Yeah.
So Mach 2 is twice the speed of sound and so on.
Yeah, so the Concorde flew at Mach 2.
Okay.
What the hypersonic aircraft Boeing is suggesting is going to be flying at Mach 5. And that's even faster than the Concorde even.
That's just bananas. Wow.
And for that to be affordable as well for the everyday Joe, which is what they sort of imagine it to be, is also another thing that's quite crazy to me. I can't imagine it. The Concorde had a lot of problems. It was a plane that, for example, after it took off, it'd have to go faster than the speed of sound and therefore break the sound barrier at some point. When that happens, like I mentioned earlier when we went to the Clipsal and the jet plane goes faster than the speed of sound, it makes a huge boom as well as the vapor.
The sonic boom, they call it. Yeah.
Yeah, so the airplane, the Concorde, had to do that somewhere. So it'd sometimes do it over the ocean. Obviously, if it did it over land, then everyone's windows start rattling. So that was a huge problem. And in the 1970s, the US government, sort of the Congress, became sick of it. So they banned these planes from doing their sonic booms over US territory.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah, so since then, that ban has been in place up until recently, actually. Donald Trump lifted the ban. So now if, a company chooses to create a hypersonic aircraft and fly it over US airspace, then that's going to be possible. And there's actually quite a few companies that are developing this sort of technology to be able to make supersonic air travel possible again. One of those is NASA. They're actually going to be, in the next couple of years, they're going to be developing a plane called the X-59 Quest, which they hope they'll fly over major US cities in 2023, which will be quiet so that it won't sonic boom over US airspace. So that'll be really interesting. That's another.
So they're working on some technology to actually get to supersonic speeds without having that boom.
Yeah, exactly. So that's obviously another interesting development.
Wow, okay. Look, I can see, Daniel, that you could talk about the various technological developments all day, but I know that we really need to get to the other half of your article, which was pretty fascinating. I mean, you called it, hypersonic travel and the end times. And I mean, I guess we've sort of been hinting at it a little. That Elon Musk obviously fears that, the world may, as we know it, may come to an end. We'll all need to move to Mars. So he's not the only one who seems to be sort of connecting the two in some ways. But you talked about the end times, which is a biblical idea, I guess. What's the connection between, hypersonic travel and the end times? Why put those two things together?
Well, there's one verse in the Bible that I think particularly points at the fact that we are heading into a place where technological advancement is going to be skyrocketing, literally.
Hey. Well done.
Pun intended. So that's Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, when he said, "But you, Daniel, roll up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge."
Okay.
So,
and in a sort of an older translation in the King James Version, it says, "Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased," which is, maybe a little more explicit. I mean, I'm not sure which is the more accurate translation, but are you connecting those verses with what we see happening around us now?
well, it's quite easy to do that because Daniel in particular, and as well as Matthew chapter 24, these sort of chapters in the Bible, they talk about the time of the end. And when you sort of connect them back to what's going around the world today, you can see that there's quite an apparent, obvious connection there. Like it was only, just over 100 years ago that air flight was just a concept. And now,
well, it's just the beginning of the 1900s, I think. In the first decade of the 1900s, the Wright Brothers took their flight. And I remember talking to my great-grandfather, who I was a kid when he was still alive, and he talked about riding a horse to school. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Things have changed a lot in a fairly short time. Yeah, I see where you're coming from.
And then, even 10 years ago, would you imagine a future where we're going fully electric? That is, again, one of those things that is just pushing the boundary. Like we never thought that we'd have cars that would be fully electric, and that seems to be the way that things are going. Just like with even our racing series like Formula E, like you mentioned, where it's going fully electric, and that's gaining a lot of interest. People have a lot of interest in this sort of future.
And I guess in terms of knowledge increasing too, I mean, there was a time, before the development of the printing press that, if a knowledgeable person could pretty much read all the books that existed in their language and be an educated person. These days, I mean, there's so much new knowledge, and not just people, blogging about their opinions on the internet, but actual academic journals and actual scientific research just coming out all the time in so many different fields. It would be actually impossible to keep up with it.
Yeah, exactly. I watched a movie with my mum recently for my birthday called First Man, which was about how
Neil Armstrong
ended up on the moon. Now, that is an incredible movie. For me, it's been the best movie of the year.
Okay, wow. I'll take that as a recommendation. I'll have to check it out.
I highly recommend it. One of the interesting things is to think that all the computers there that helped Neil Armstrong get to the moon, we have more computing power in our pockets now on our smartphones than all that technology that got him there.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
It is. that is incredible. Wow.
Yeah, I strongly take that Daniel chapter 12 verse 4 as an indicator that this is the way that things are headed. And when we look around the world, when we look at how fast cars are going now, when we look at how fast airplanes are going now, where we look at, when there's talk of humans ending up on Mars, certainly I don't think we're going to get there. I think that is too far-fetched.
Yeah.
But whether or not we should get there is another question.
Okay, so that's interesting because that verse in Daniel describes, it uses the phrase "the time of the end," and then it gives some descriptors as to that time of the end, saying that knowledge will increase, which is something we see happening right now, has been happening for, probably the knowledge has been increasing for a few centuries now, and men will run to and fro, which this hypersonic travel thing you're talking about, we're traveling so much. People are everywhere, people are moving all over the country or all over the world. We certainly are running to and fro in a actual physical sense, and probably a psychological sense too. We don't know if we're Arthur or Martha half the time. So these are descriptors of the time of the end. It does seem to fit quite well, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But there are verses that also substantiate other things that will be happening in the world in regards to the end of the time. And they also sort of, I guess, in a roundabout way, they refer to us how far travel technology will have advanced. Like Matthew 24:14 says, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." Now, when you can you can imagine that without travel technology, that would probably not be possible.
And communications technology too.
Exactly. So there's multiple facets to that verse that when we look at the world these days, where we are now able to travel to far-fetched countries and talk to people that we weren't able to talk to before and share the gospel, that's also a part of the knowledge increasing.
Okay, so Matthew 24:14 is saying the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world. And I guess what you're saying is that previously it was quite hard to reach the whole world, but now due to these technologies, it's actually doable. It's possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting way to read that verse. So when you think about the end of the world, the end of time, the end of days, this sort of stuff, I mean, do you think people see this as a sort of a crazy religious idea, Daniel, or is it something that people will resonate with?
I think back to when I was studying journalism, and I used to go, obviously I've grown up in the church, so I am, sort of aware of how we perceive the Bible, how we interpret the Bible, and how we believe that our time on earth is finite, that Jesus will be coming again. It's really interesting because a lot of my journalism lectures, I'd go into the lectures and it'd be talking about murders, rapes, stabbings, how it's just getting worse and worse. We used to have lectures on suicide, how suicide is skyrocketing, suicide rates.
That is true, yeah.
All these sort of things that define the world we live in right now. And I look at it and it reminds me of the sort of sermons that I've heard where pastors have talked about how bad the world is going to be in the time before the end. And I can't help but feel that is exactly the time we're living in right now. And when you look at it, Kent, you're a man with experience. You've been on this planet longer than I have. Can you honestly say that the trend is getting worse or better?
Look, I think in terms of violent crime in Western countries, it's actually getting better. But I think you're right about suicide and depression. Those things are becoming epidemics. Then also I think we see things like global warming. Climate change. I mean, this is the sort of thing people are talking about very much with sort of doomsday sort of tones in their voice. And then when we see, North Korea having issues and you think, oh boy, nuclear war actually is still a possibility. I mean, in the 80s, people talked about it a lot. 70s and 80s, they were really worried about it. And, New Zealand declared itself nuclear free and all this sort of stuff. But it's still a possibility that someone could go rogue with a nuclear weapon. And then, look, there are just all sorts of unexpected things, a meteor. I mean, who knows? There are so many different ways that the world could end, and various different people are talking about it from various different perspectives. But I think a lot of people do accept that, it is a possibility. It could happen. And it's interesting to notice that the Bible suggests, this world isn't going to last forever. There will be an end. I don't know. Is it scary? Do you find that scary or just fascinating or what?
I think one verse that we see in Matthew 24 in particular is that because of the increase of wickedness, the love of many will grow cold. So when you look at the world these days, it's hard to feel safe in a lot of places. It's hard to feel safe going outside where a person could stab you or a person could commit a terrorist attack.
Or even staying inside, it's not safe, these days with, cyberbullying and, people looking at you through your webcams and, all that sort of stuff as well.
Yep. I think that our naivety is dying off. People these days understand the risks involved with life and how, your fellow man could just snap and do you harm. This sort of stuff is definitely scary. As far as the future goes, I know that it might seem scary that the Bible predicts that things are going to be getting worse to a certain extent, and then Jesus will come. But at the same time, it's about what happens after that really matters. That's the core of our belief, is that we're actually preaching the message of what happens after that, which was eternal life with Jesus in heaven. And the thing that will get us there is not knowing how bad the world is going to reach before we get there, but rather what do we need to do to get there, which is have a relationship with Jesus. And as far as God's control over these events, we know that God predicted these things. He is keeping his eye over it, that because of sin, bad things are happening around the world and will continue to happen, but God has a plan for each and every one of us. I think that's something very important to consider every time we read anything about the end times, to not be scared because of that.
Mm-hmm. And I guess just purely from a practical point of view, I mean, if you have a smoke alarm in your house, for example, I mean, it's that smoke alarm's job to go off when there's smoke in the room, you know, and you can say to the smoke alarm, "Oh, goodness me, you're such a downer, you're so negative." But the fact is that, you know, it's the job of that smoke alarm to save your life, you know, to get you to like either deal with the fire if it's small enough, or just, you know, get the heck out of your house so that you don't burn to death. And I guess, you know, perhaps if the world is heading in a bad direction, I mean, we should be giving warnings. I mean, certainly the climate scientists are giving us warnings. And if, you know, there are other aspects of our behavior that are leading us towards our own destruction, and whether it's our diet or our lifestyle or whatever, we're being warned. And we can say, oh, this is so negative. But really, we need to hear it, you know, because we need to know it if we're going to do something about it. So I guess I do struggle a little bit when I hear people say, oh, goodness me, you're so doom and gloom. Well, you know, actually, maybe we need to hear the warning.
Yeah, exactly. And a core foundation of what the Bible presents is actually not doom and gloom, though it may be interpreted that way when you read Matthew 24 and you read Revelation and you see these sort of prophecies and, you know, about the time of the end. It may be easy to think it's going to get really bad. Maybe I should just ignore everything what the Bible is reading and live an ignorant bliss life. But at the same time, a lot of what Jesus teaches and a lot of what the Bible teaches is actually not about despair. It's about hope. That's one of the common themes of the Bible.
Wow. You actually quote a couple of verses towards the end of your article that I think are really filled with hope and really filled with comfort. Well, one of them's from Isaiah 41:10. It says, God speaking, and he says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." That's a real message of comfort, isn't it? And of hope.
I learnt in primary school, these guys once came to our primary school with a giant rock climbing wall. And before we jumped on that and did the rock climbing wall, because a lot of us chickened out and we're like, oh, I don't know if I should do it. It's scary. It's tall.
Yep.
One of the guys was like, you know what fear is? And he just wrote it as an acronym. He's like, it's false evidence appearing real.
Whoa.
And I think that really relates to a lot of our fears. A lot of our fears are taking something and then extrapolating it and coming up with a whole different conclusion. You can't sit and be scared about the future and scared about what's going to happen, what might not happen until it happens. And the thing about the Bible is that it gives us all these warning signs so that we're aware, so that we're educated and we have the knowledge. You know, these prophecies
prepared.
Exactly, be prepared. These prophecies are coming to light and we're starting to understand them for that very reason, not to be scared, but rather to understand what God has in store for us. But at the same time, we've also got God himself. He makes it clear in the Bible that he has got us under his control. He's got it. We don't have to worry about it. And one of the verses that particularly highlights that, and I mentioned in the article, is, so Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future."
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is beautiful. That's an incredible encouragement there. And it's been incredibly encouraging having you too on the show today. Thanks so much, Daniel, for your insights and your enthusiasm. I hope that next time you actually get to shake Elon Musk by the hand and look him in the eye.
Maybe we should send him an invite on Twitter to join us on Signs of the Times Radio, because he seems to be a guy who likes to accept a bit of a challenge.
Sounds like a great idea. Hey, thanks for your time this week, Daniel. Really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for listening.
Cheers, guys.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Signs of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit signsofthetimes.org.au. Signs of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.